Hi, y'all. It's Helen, and welcome to Yellow Chair Collective, the podcast. We have a really interesting guest today, somatic coach and author of Decolonizing the Body, Kelsey Blackwell. Highly recommend getting the book. Also wanted to promote her newsletter, kelseyblackwell.substack.com. Let's start the episode. Kelsey, I want to start out with your backstory. So for people that don't know you, you are a somatic coach, you are an author, you are a writer, and one of the first things that I noticed reading the welcome page of your book, you say, I feel really comfortable around you even though I don't know you. No masks, no shape shifting, no pretending. And so can you unpack for me what decolonizing the body means for women of color seeking self-healing and self-reclamation?
Yeah. Well, one of the choices I made in writing the book is really naming my audience as women of color. And I did that intentionally, even though there was pressure to make it more of a general book. For sure, it's more marketable to talk about somatics and healing to a larger audience than to specifically target a smaller subset of the population. And so I did that because that's the lens I'm speaking from, and that's who I work with. And so it was important to me to clarify that at the beginning. And with that clarity, I was already able to feel a sense of ease in the writing process because I knew that I was speaking with women who I may not have known, but on some level I knew because I have worked with so many different women of color from different backgrounds. And I always feel so much more myself when I can be in that space. So I entered in the writing process with that kind of mindset that gave me more ease in the writing process. And this idea of decolonizing the body is really understanding how our bodies have, all of our bodies, not just women of color, but all of our bodies have learned different patterns in order to survive inside of inequitable systems. And we can look at any of the isms, racism, transphobia, sexism, etc., and trace the roots of those systems to the beginnings of domination and the ways that countries of power would go into other countries and assert dominance as a way to secure resources and dominion over a population. And we can ask, what is the mindset that would allow a population to do that? And how is that mindset so very different from what we're contending with in our society today? And the truth is, it's not that different. So in looking at decolonization, we're looking at, okay, yes, this happened. And yes, these forces are still present today. And my body has learned how to survive inside of these systems. And these have been wise adaptations to deal with adversity. And at some point, those adaptations come at a cost. And in decolonizing, we're recognizing the cost of those adaptations and beginning a healing journey of reclaiming what's been lost.
What I really appreciate about what you do, especially in the realm of somatics, is that you go beyond just the medical model of healing, where you really challenge people to look at the social model of who am I in the context of a system, and how has the system oppressed me, elevated me, depending on my privilege, depending on my presentation and my body. And I want to go a little bit deeper into your personal story. And how did you begin in the work of somatics? And how did the genesis of the book come about for you?
Yeah. Well, I've always been an embodied person. I was a dancer and a kinesthetic learner, though I didn't know that about myself. So in our academic settings, which really prefer a more linear analytical style of learner, I internalized a feeling that I wasn't smart.
Really?
I'm not. Yeah. I'm not.
That's
I'm
so
not.
surprising.
Yeah.
Based on what you're doing? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was like, I'm not as smart as the other kids. And it wasn't until later in life, in my 20s, that I learned about all these different types of intelligence. And I'm a
How old were
kinesthetic.
you?
I was in my
You were
20s.
25, mid. I guess I'm curious about like mid 20s, early 20s, late 20s.
Late 20s.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like much later on. So I put
Yeah.
my dancing to the side to become a serious adult. And yeah, so long story short, I learned about being a kinesthetic learner. I started dancing again and
Uh-huh.
called Interplay, which I use a lot in my work, and just want to
Hmm.
lift up the founders of that practice, Cynthia Winton Henry and Phil Porter, who have a studio in Oakland that's a former headquarters of the Black Panthers. And I walked
That's
in
awesome.
there and I said, I don't know what happens in here, but I want to be a part of it. I could just, my body could feel that there was magic there. And that's where
Wow.
I learned the idea that our bodies hold wisdom and that our bodies all deserve and have capacity to engage with movement, storytelling, and song, and that these are birthright practices that we have lost due to the impacts of colonization. And
Mm.
so coming back into touch with those practices in myself, I just remember feeling so much more alive and whole and like things were clicking into place. Like, this makes sense. This is the practice. This is the way of navigating my life that I've been longing for, and why other spaces have felt so inaccessible or stuffy to me, because I've had to
Mm.
try these aspects of my creative embodied self in order to survive in those spaces.
Yeah.
So that practice led me into studying somatics as a healing modality through the Strozzi Institute, and really looking at the impacts of intergenerational trauma and how our bodies store trauma. And I bring both of these practices together alongside the wisdom that my body holds from my own ancestors in navigating a healing journey in the work that I do
Mm.
with clients. And from working with women of color and hearing many of the same themes showing up from client to client, I launched a program.
Mm.
And the program was called Decolonizing the Body because a colleague of mine asked me to write an article for her newsletter on decolonizing the body. And I said, okay. So I
Oh
wrote
my
the article for
gosh.
her, and I was like, oh, can I call my program this? And she was like, yeah. And yeah, that's how it started.
It sounds like a story of whimsy, doesn't it? Like
Yeah.
I came across this place that made me feel at home, and then I felt in tune with my body, and then I found this, and then I found this. And so can you speak to this act of surrender that I feel like plays a huge role in your life?
Yeah, very perceptive. Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I wanted to be a serious adult. I wanted to have
Hmm.
a traditional job. I wanted to go to a 9 to 5. That was my idea of
Yeah.
what my life would look like.
Yeah.
And spirit just has another plan. So
Mm.
I was in, I was pursuing that as a magazine writer and editor. And I just, I had so much anxiety, and I didn't really know that I had anxiety because it was generalized, but it was
Hmm.
operating under the surface. And I really could never be comfortable in that space. And I didn't know why. I kept trying to play the role, but I never could play it enough. There was something off. There was a note that was off. So through a series of events, I ended up getting laid off and immediately
Mm.
scrambled to try to find something to fill that the place of that work, which I think many of us do when there's a big shift, right? Oh no, I've got
Right.
to pay my rent. I've got to pay my bills. What am I going to do? And I
Right.
have a really wise friend who said to me, what if you didn't make decisions out of fear? What if you made decisions out of joy or excitement or curiosity? And
Mm.
I really took that advice to heart. And so I continued to look for jobs in publishing, but none of those, when I really tuned in, and again, this comes from, I think, being a kinesthetic embodied person, I could feel when I looked at those jobs or did those interviews that they didn't feel right. It didn't feel good. So I
I
had to
love this
listen to
story.
that. I had to listen to that.
Yeah.
And it was definitely scary. It was scary.
Mm.
I woke up some mornings and I would just take myself on a walk and
Mm.
be outside And that would be how I would come down from the sort of spinning in my mind of anxiety, because I was diverging from the path that I had seen and that was modeled for me. So it felt like jumping into the wild unknown, and my mind could create all kinds of potential fears, right? Doom was always around the corner. But when I could come back to, okay, I'm here, I'm walking, and there's my neighbors, there's that cat that I see. Today I'm okay. And then things started to show up, like little opportunities started to show up. Hey, would you like to lead our meditation group? Or hey, would you like to train with us and learn this embodiment practice? Oh, can you teach this practice? I started to see that I was taken care of. And so that just continued to evolve and develop. And here I am.
That's so beautiful. There's a book I'm reading right now called Letting Go by Dr. David Hawkins, and he talks about the approach of surrender and how life oftentimes can happen for us if we surrender to the emotion and the losslessness. And I hear that in your story. And jumping into this like surrender piece, you talked a little bit. Yeah, you talk a little bit about being in this state of fear and wanting to make a decision out of fear.
Yeah.
I guess my question is, most of the people that listen to this podcast are 25 to 35, and they're at the crux of trying to figure out identity.
Yeah.
I guess when you look at it from a macro perspective of systemic oppression and holding trauma in our bodies, what is the wisdom you know now about what was actually happening in that surrender? What's something that you didn't really quite have the words for that you have now?
Yeah, great question. Wow.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm continuing to learn this lesson. Even as I reflect back on it, I can see that there was a larger organizing intelligence that was guiding me. And you could call that organizing intelligence, embodied knowing. You could call it spirit. You could call it the ancestors. You could call it the universe. But there was something that I could actually rest back into and trust. And the way that I could rest back into that and trust that was by learning how to put down the chaos of my mind and let myself be guided by my curiosity or what was sparking interest or joy or beauty or a desire for deeper connection, right? That's what was guiding me. And I continue to believe in that intelligence, even in a world that's so clearly fraught. And one thing that's so beautiful about somatics and starting to be in a practice of learning to trust our bodies is how we can see how our bodies are able to hold complexity, that we can feel joy and sadness at the same time. So our world, we can be guided by a loving and present and supportive universe, and at the same time see incredible harm and violence, and they both are coexisting. And in our own bodies and our own lives, we can learn not to disassociate from the real difficulties of the world. We have a habit as humans to fixate on what's hard. And so we can notice what's hard, but we can also be attuning toward and turning toward grace. We can be attuning toward beauty and letting that guide us. And it continues to be surprising and delightful where that journey takes us.
Yeah. You have this on your Twitter bio. You have joy is our compass.
Oh, yeah.
Can you tell me what that means? Joy is our compass.
Yeah. So oftentimes when I'm leading a workshop, I'll ask people, what might liberation feel like? And even though we don't know collectively, what in our wildest imagination? And I invite more than words. Give me a texture, give me a shape, give me a color, give me a memory. So for me today, it feels watching the sun glint off of Lake Merritt, where I live, watching the sparkle dance and feeling that sparkling in my own belly and that a deep connection to that aliveness, right? But it could be different day by day. Anyway, I think it's important that we tune to that bigger yes, that sense of life moving us toward life as our guide to whatever it is we're creating, right? Like a seed in its embryonic form, right? It's in the shell, but there's some life that's calling it forward, even though it doesn't know. And at this point, it's surrounded by darkness, and there's probably just going to be more of this. Like, why would I leave? But there's something possible that seed feels that is moving it toward another existence, another reality. And I think that one of the easiest ways to tune into what life is moving us toward is our own joy, is pleasure, is that sense of brilliance and beauty. Even if it's the smallest little thing, right? In that moment, attuning to that and following that is such an important guide in a world that's so willing to barrage us with negativity and reasons why we're not enough and we're not doing enough, right? It's a real practice to hold and follow something else. And it's a practice that I recommend doing with the support of community.
Yeah, you hold a lot of group workshops in decolonizing the body.
Yeah.
What do you think a lot of women, what transformation do you see in the group work that you do?
You know, honestly, what I see a lot, it's like the equivalent of like when you get home from a long day and you just kick off your shoes and like you get to be in your favorite chair and you're just like, I get to shut the day out and just be here and it's safe. But being able to feel that in community, in collective. Oh, I actually can let myself relax and feel held alongside all these other bodies who get to relax and feel held. We don't have to perform. We can just be who we are. There's something about that is incredibly revitalizing. Yeah, that coming home within a collective. And I'll say that I've been thinking a little bit about this work of decolonizing the body, and I'm like, why is this so important to me? Like, why doing it in a group is so important to me? And I remember that when I was young, I loved going to Girl Scout camp. And I would sell Girl Scout cookies so I could get to camp. And oftentimes I didn't know anybody there. I would go and not have a single friend. And then within a day or so, I had a best friend and I felt total belonging. And this was a big deal because I grew up in a white conservative place. And so I never felt like I belonged. But when I was at Girl Scout camp, I did. And we woke up together. We went to bed at the same time. We ate dinner at the same time. We sang songs. We went on hikes. We looked at the stars. And this imprinted on me at a young age. And so I think in some ways, my work that I'm doing now is like trying to get back to Girl Scout camp.
It's like that mutual belonging of we all got to this place where we worked really hard and we're grateful to be here because we earned it. Yeah, that's so beautiful. I never went to Girl Scout camp, but I feel that the joy and the essence that you carry when it comes to that, because it's such a beautiful experience.
Totally. And others might have other experiences with Girl Scout camps. It's not so much about the Girl Scouts. I had a good experience with the Girl Scouts, but it was about, I think, touching into a way of living collectively that felt like it made sense to my body. I'm not an individual self. I am part of this unit and we're moving together and we're all attuning the same things. We're speaking about what we're attuning to, like it's raining or it's hot or we're hungry or whatever, right? We're attuning to what's happening in our environment and we're naming it. And we have ritual and ceremony around how we're organizing ourselves. That's the world I want to live in.
That's so good. It's so refreshing and also really impressive that you learned that lesson at a young age, because I'm 26. And so the social media movement historically for me started when I was 12 or 13 at the height of puberty. And so
Wow.
the concept of the I mentality, the iPhone, the iMac, there's so many, influencer starts with an I. The
Yes.
fact that you were in a community where you sought to become bigger than yourself, to be part of something bigger than yourself. And then your program is not Kelsey Blackwell, it's Decolonizing the Body.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that importance of collective thinking and why that's so relevant to our culture now, you think? Just your hypothesis, because I know I asked you a really big question.
If we think about humanity in general, it is our ability to operate as a collective that has allowed us to survive. So capitalism, which is relatively new in the scope of humanity, like the last 500 years, whereas humans have been on the planet 20,000 years. So this is like a small snippet of time,
right?
Which I think is helpful because it feels like we're so far removed from the way our ancestors navigated the world. And yet at the same time, it's just right behind us. And we can feel the discord of the toxic individualism that we especially have in the West. What ultimately will support our species to survive will be our ability to come back together and operate as a harmonious collective. And unfortunately, if we don't do that, we will not survive. And we know how that will play out because of the disparity that we live in, right? It will be the most vulnerable who die first. And then our communities will continue to get smaller and smaller until it is just the plutocratic few who survive. So the question that we're in as a society is, can we wake up to the trajectory that we're on and start to engage in new practices that will ultimately support our survival as a species? Right. And people are on different in different places in regards to that question.
That's so true.
But I love people. And so I see somatics as being one of those, as Audre Lorde writes about, right? One of the tools that's not a master's tool. Because when the colonizers came in, the first thing they did was displace people from land. And displacing people from land is the fastest way to gain power over them. And just as we were displaced from our land, then we were displaced or disconnected from our bodies, not allowed to speak our native tongue, not allowed to dress in the way that we have historically dressed, not allowed to engage in our spiritual practices, not allowed to engage in our rituals, right? All of this is a form of control. So reconnecting with the things that have been lost, I see, and this is again the teaching of Sankofa, I see as an essential tool for whatever it is we're going to be navigating toward in the future. And I'm optimistic, personally.
I love that. You wouldn't be in this work if you didn't have a belief that things can change and things will inevitably change regardless of whether or not we're conscious or unconscious of it.
Yeah.
But I do want to dive into the book and more of your personal coaching work. And so we've talked a little bit about listening to the body, moving at pace with the body, being in tune with practical ways that we can take ourselves on a walk. But I want to go into the nitty-gritty of it all.
Yeah.
Where could you share some practical steps or exercises that can help people interested in connecting back to their bodies? What are some things that people can do to increase their intuition and their bodily wisdom?
Yeah. Gosh. So I can answer in the most helpful way. Are we imagining this as somebody who has no embodied practices right now? So like they're completely new.
Okay. Correct. I think I'm envisioning, so the audience is mostly Asian American women who have been taught to logicalize or to suppress their identities. And so maybe speaking to that.
Yeah. So one of the things to think or hold as we start to relate to the body is that our body learns through practice. And the more we practice something, then the more embodied or natural it feels. But when we first start that practice, it probably feels not the most natural or embodied, right? So we can think about anything that we learn through the body, learning a new dance, or even learning to speak another language, or learning tennis, right? So I just want to name that, because when we do these practices, especially when we're coming from a more analytical place, the mind is going to challenge what we're doing. And it's going to say, you're not doing it right. This isn't working. And part of the reason the mind does that is because when we challenge the body and our practices that connect us to the body, then it gets to maintain control and dominion over what we do. So some of the work of somatics is learning how to have a power with relationship between our mind and our body. Okay. I would say that for someone who is new to somatics and is just wanting to start a gentle way of coming back into their body, and from that place, learning to trust intuition, is to enter in through a practice of joy. And that is going to be individual for different bodies. But one of the questions you can ask yourself is, how did I play as a child? Did I like to play dress up? Did I like to role play? That's what I liked to do. Did I like to ride my bike? I liked to do that. Did I color, draw? Did I play being in nature and digging holes? Did I like dancing? However we played as a child, oftentimes it's an embodied activity. And I like to enter in through a practice of joy, especially one that might remind us of what we did as a kid, because there's already a body groove in our own body of what it feels like to do that thing. And so it's not as far of a stretch as doing something that's totally unfamiliar. And then to start with something that's really small. So let's say you liked to make up dances as a kid. That's what I used to like to do, and then perform them. So one of the practices I like to do is a movement meditation practice where I put on a piece of music and I let my body move however it wants to move for the duration of the song. Inevitably, my mind will show up and it will say, it will pretend there's an audience and I'm doing a really good job, or it will go into some performance mode. And that's fine. We let the mind do what it's doing. You just notice when it's doing. And when we notice that the mind is showing up, we come back to, what does my body want right now? And can I let myself have it? And again, this is a practice that might feel uncomfortable at first. What does my body want right now? And then as we start to lean into letting ourselves have it, it can feel a little edgy. Am I allowed to have that? Am I allowed to do my movement practice and just lay on the floor for the song? Is that allowed? Did I do it right? Right? We start to notice the track of the mind, but we come back to, what is my body asking for? Can I let myself have it? Building that relationship to the body from a place of joy. I like to think of getting into the ocean from a safe shore. So oftentimes when we want to work with the body, especially when we know our body's holding trauma and ancestral stuff, we like put on our boots and we put on we get prepared. We're like, I'm going in. I'm going to go into the deepest part of the ocean. Even though we don't know how to swim, we're like, I'm going to do it. I'm ready.
Yeah.
And we do that and we overwhelm ourselves, because we need to know, as we start to wade into all that our bodies hold, which is immense, that there's somewhere safe we can always come back to. So we start on the playful, easy shore. And then with time, we start to get curious. Oh, maybe I want to wade in a little deeper. Maybe I want to wade in a little deeper. And that wading in deeper is it could be working with someone like a practitioner who supports you in going to those deeper places. Or it could be making more time for yourself to connect with the raw data of sensation in your body, which I like to do in front of an altar, right? In front of an ancestral altar.
That's so good. That reminds me of like your 6th chapter of Turning the Wave, or can you unpack what smashing the Oreo is.
Oh, yeah. I was like, what is my 6th chapter? Yeah.
It's so I looked over your table of contents before starting this interview, and you really do a really careful job about helping people uncover the why behind this work is important. And then you start to go into the nitty-gritty of what it looks like to just take a little bit of time to go back into that ocean. But can you talk about the Oreo?
Yeah. So every racialized group has their version of this, but it's that smashing the Oreo is that sense of being racialized a certain way, but then being told for whatever reason you don't fit in that group.
Yeah.
So you're not Asian enough because you don't speak Mandarin, right? You're not Black enough because your family didn't grow up watching the Jeffersons, right? Whatever. And so in that chapter, I wanted to name that, and this is another reason I do this work with women of color, is that the ways that we other each other, the ways that we've been othered, show up in how we other and categorize each other. And oftentimes the pain of feeling othered within the group that we identify is more painful than feeling othered by white-bodied people. Because this is the group that we're hoping we can go to and feel a sense of home, and feel a sense of being met, and feel a sense of I'm not alone. And when that group is no longer safe for us, that is a form of racial trauma and violence that I don't think gets talked about enough. And it's one that I have experienced in my own life, and I'm not alone there. Yeah. When we talk about this in the Black community, it's like a lot of head nods. It's like being Black enough. One of the things that I continue to learn is around recognizing my belonging internally. And that the more I go outside of myself to look for my belonging, the more elusive it is. And as I reclaim my relationship to my body, I'm reclaiming my relationship to my ancestors, all of them, even the ones that I don't know. And I belong because the wisdom of them lives in me, and I am here, and I am of the earth. I may not be of the place that they are, but the memory of that place lives in me. And I can have a relationship to the land that I was born on, right? And to be in an actual practice of reclaiming our belonging outside of the ways that we've been told our hair should look, or our skin should look, or the way we should talk, or how we should dress, is a really powerful practice to engage in, and also one that I find needs to be done over and over again, because these pressures get put onto us. And so in that chapter, this actually came from watching a show that I really did not like, how the women were racialized. And so I was so upset that I just went outside and I started throwing rocks, and they were the best rocks because I would throw them and they would shatter on the ground. And so that chapter is really inviting us to imagine all of these things that have been put onto us, and then to engage in a ritual or process of reclaiming our authority, reclaiming our belonging, and releasing the bullshit that's been hoisted upon us. And it's an act that requires energy. Oftentimes there's anger in it. So that's what breaking the Oreo is.
I love how you're unafraid of your own anger, because I think as women of color, we fear that. And especially in the Asian American community, I'm Filipina, so I think that there's this pressure to be pleasant, to not come off as a B word, to not be rude. And so speaking to that anger is so healing to hear you say that.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean,
did you ever struggle with that, reclaiming your anger? Or to interrupt?
No, it's cool. I feel like I really love the work of Carla McLaren when it comes to understanding emotions. And many of us have emotions that visit us more frequently. So it could be anger, it could be anxiety, it could be depression, it could be grief, it could be whatever. When it's an emotion that we're not supposed to have, or an emotion that we don't want to have, then and some of this not supposed to or don't want to does come from the ways we've been conditioned. Oh, I'm not allowed to have anger. Anger is about taking up space. I'm not allowed to take up space. So I better stuff this somewhere. Could be, but it could be any number of emotions that we end up stuffing because they're not the nice and pretty emotions to have. And oftentimes that stuffing happens by pushing that emotion somewhere into our body. And then as we start to work with the body, it comes to the fore, right?
Yep.
And then what do we do with that? Yeah, I think Carla's perspective is, and one that I really align with, is that we, and again, this is part of the ways that we are socialized, but there are good emotions and there are bad emotions. And if it's a bad emotion, then we need to get rid of it. And if we can't get rid of it, then that becomes a problem. But instead to relate to our emotions as wisdom holders, and every emotion, regardless of how we experience it, like if it feels comfortable or if it feels uncomfortable, regardless of that emotion is holding information. And so when that emotion arises, instead of being like, uh-oh, we can say, ooh, this is showing up because there's something it's telling me. And with anger, oftentimes what it's telling us is that our dignity has been challenged. Anger is like, oh, somebody's walking on me. This is an opportunity to reassert a boundary, right? And we may not be in an environment where we can do that, right? Because of whatever expectations there might be, or whatever is available, like maybe our body is not safe there. So to have anger isn't a safe thing. And, or when we recognize that we've had that emotion and based on our environment had to suppress it, to then when we're in a safer place, to honor that emotion, to give it the space that it needs. And there is something about being in that process that starts to break up that conditioning, that then when we come out into our world, with time, we start to see more opportunities for that emotion to surface. So in my own life, one of the ways that this shows up is I'm supposed to be of service. I'm not supposed to be a burden on anyone. I'm supposed to be helpful. And if anyone offers me like a job, then I'm supposed to do it and do it well and respect their authority, right? Like they're in charge. And this has led to me getting underpaid for my work and underpaid for what I offer. And I would feel these resentments around that, but then I would just push them away and keep going. Or I'd go home and I'd talk about that person, but I wouldn't actually do it. But with enough practice of allowing myself to honor that emotion coming up, I need more space. This is showing up because I'm not being valued. I actually had a conversation with someone I was doing work with and said, hey, I need to get paid double what you're paying me. Was it an easy conversation to have? No. But when I had it on the other side of that, I felt relief. And my body was like, thank you for not abandoning. Thank you for trusting what we were telling you.
That's I hear that all the time as women of color, that we are so uncomfortable asking for what we want. And I guess from that perspective, like it's a deep breath out to hear your vulnerability around, like, it's continuous practice, it's continuous work, and being able to align what comes out of your mouth with what your body is needing from you in that moment.
Totally.
Thank you for sharing, Kelsey. That's so important.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to be respectful of your time and just end with this. I am so appreciative of the work that you continue to do for women, for the work of literature, because I felt personally liberated reading your book. And I guess one question I would have for you is if you could give advice to women like me who are in their late 20s, what lesson do you wish, maybe not lesson, or maybe skill, do you wish you could have learned earlier? Get to the place that you are now.
I would say do less.
Do
enough. I think in our 20s, we're really trying to make our way and figure it out and be adult. That's what I was trying to do. Be an adult.
Yeah.
Not honoring like who I was in order to fit the role of who I thought I should be. And there was a lot of scheming in my mind of I should do this and I should do that and I should take that certification and right? All of these things happening. And that was coming from a place of insecurity and fear. And what I hope all women feel in the work that I do is that we're enough. We don't have to extend beyond ourselves in order to be enough. We can actually trust what it is that we're naturally drawn toward. We can actually allow ourselves to put things out into the world that even aren't our very best effort. We could put something out and it could be like a C effort. And that is actually enough. Sometimes I talk about like being our inner white man, which is a triggering thing to say, but it's
exactly what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. And hey, I did this. Like I did what I could with the time I had. And it's great. You're welcome. Where else do you want me to shine? Yeah.
That's so good. Thank you, Kelsey. This was
Thank you,
so
Helen.
helpful.
What a treat. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course, it was a pleasure.